It was the kind of September that made people in Tillicum Falls believe they had been given something back. The summer had run long that year, warm all the way into the third week of the month, and the valley still smelled of warm grass and the Tillamook River and the particular sweetness that comes from blackberries going soft at the end of the season. The Harmon family had been planning this weekend for a month. Gary and Elaine had 3 kids, a house on Birchwood Road, and a habit of spending the last good weekend of summer at Meriwether Lake. This was supposed to be Kendra's last family trip for a while. She was 17, just started her senior year, and everyone understood without saying it that the era of family trips was changing. She had been working at the Dairy Queen since June, saving money, and had told her mother in one of those kitchen conversations that she thought she might want to study nursing. Elaine said she'd be a good nurse. She had the temperament for it. On Friday evening, September 20th, 1985, the Harmon family loaded the station wagon and drove north toward Meriwether Lake. Kendra sat in the back with her youngest brother Danny and spent most of the drive reading a paperback and occasionally passing him potato chips. She was the last one into the lake house. She waved at a neighbor across the lane, and that was the last ordinary moment of her life. Tillicum Falls sat at the northern end of Oregon's Coast Range foothills, a town of 4,200 people built around a paper mill that had been running since 1923 and a logging heritage that went back further than anyone still living could personally vouch for. The mill dominated the south end of town. You could smell the sulfur from the pulping process on damp mornings, which was most mornings, and the residents had long since stopped noticing it the way you stopped noticing the particular smell of your own house. Main Street had a hardware store, a barber shop, a pharmacy, a diner called Rudy's that served biscuits and gravy all day, and a Dairy Queen at the far end where the high school kids congregated on Friday evenings. The high school had 412 students. The same families had been sending children there since the 1940s, and it was not unusual to have a teacher whose parents had also taught in the district, or to be coached by a man your father had played football for. Everyone knew everyone. But in Tillicum Falls, that phrase had specific content. It meant you knew the names of the other family's dogs, and what the dad did for work, and what the mom brought to the school potlucks. Kendra Harmon was 17 and had been known in Tillicum Falls since birth. She had her father's dark hair and her mother's way of paying attention to people when they talked, really attending. The way some people do that makes you feel like the only person in the room. She had been a candy striper at Tillicum Valley Medical Center for 2 summers running, which was where the nursing idea had come from. She had a best friend named Tricia Oakes, who had been in the desk next to hers since 3rd grade. She drove a 1979 Toyota Corolla that she had bought herself from summer wages and was enormously proud of. She had a collection of paperback mysteries she kept in a milk crate under her bed, alphabetized by author. She had a plan. She had, in the particular way of 17-year-olds who are about to become something, a whole future arranged neatly in front of her. On the morning of Saturday, September 21st, 1985, she drove the Corolla into Tillicum Falls to pick up a few things from the pharmacy for her mother. Gary Harmon watched her pull out of the lake house lane. He turned back to his coffee. He never saw her again. The pharmacy run should have taken 40 minutes. At 10:15 a.m., on September 21st, Elaine Harmon called the pharmacy from the lake house and was told Kendra had not come in. At 11:00, Gary drove the route himself. The Corolla was not on any road between the lake house and Main Street. At 12:30 p.m., Gary Harmon called the Tillicum Falls Police Department. The initial report was logged at 12:47 p.m. Within 2 hours, a search had been organized. Then, at 3:20 that afternoon, a deputy found the Corolla. It was parked in the lot behind the Tillicum Falls Community Center, on Mill Street, 4 blocks from the pharmacy, and 2 blocks from the paper mill's main gate. The doors were locked. The keys were inside, on the passenger seat. The pharmacy bag was on the floor on the passenger side. Aspirin, a tube of lip balm, a bottle of hand lotion, receipt time-stamped 9:48 a.m. She had made it to the pharmacy. She had made it back to her car. Something had happened between the pharmacy and the lake house. Something had happened in that parking lot, or on the street between it and the lot, at some point between 9:48 a.m. and whatever moment the Corolla came to rest behind the community center. The search expanded through the afternoon and into the evening. By Sunday morning, volunteers from 4 surrounding communities had joined. The mill's day shift organized a search team of their own. They walked the riverbanks south of town, the logging roads off the county highway, the woodline east of Meriwether Lake. Nothing. By Sunday evening, the search had covered 12 square miles of the valley. By Monday morning, 60 hours after Kendra had driven away from the lake house, the Tillicum Falls PD had a locked car with a pharmacy bag inside, a receipt time-stamped 9:48 a.m., and no witness to a single thing that had happened in between. The community center lot was processed Tuesday through Thursday. A partial footprint was recovered near the driver's door. It was photographed, cast, and filed. A partial smear on the door handle was submitted to the state lab. Results came back inconclusive. Not enough to type. The evidence that would eventually solve this case existed, but not in either of those samples. It was somewhere else, somewhere the investigation in 1985 did not reach. Gary Harmon did not stop driving the roads. Elaine Harmon did not stop calling. Tricia Oakes drove to the lake house on Sunday and sat with the family. She said nothing useful. There was nothing useful to say. The Corolla was in an impound lot with a pharmacy bag on the floor, and aspirin, and lip balm, and hand lotion, and a receipt. And whoever had been in that parking lot on a Saturday morning in September had left and gone somewhere that nobody had yet thought to look. Detective Hugh Colby of the Tillicum Falls PD had been on the force for 16 years and was 43 years old in the fall of 1985. A methodical man who kept his notes in a stenographer's pad and had a habit of rereading them from the beginning every few days, because he believed that what you missed the first time sometimes became visible on the third. He pulled the community center lot apart over the course of a week. He canvassed every business on Mill Street. He interviewed every employee at the pharmacy. He requested and received the names of every vehicle registered in Tillicum Falls and the surrounding county whose owner had any connection to the Harmon family or Tillicum Falls High School. The list was long. He worked it methodically. A name appeared early and stayed on the list. Darren Pruitt, 38 years old, who taught 10th grade biology at Tillicum Falls High and had been there for 11 years. Pruitt had no connection to Kendra Harmon that Colby could document. He had not been her teacher. He had no documented interaction with her family. He had been at the Mills company picnic on the afternoon of the disappearance. Multiple witnesses confirmed it. He was placed on the list, and not removed, but was not elevated. A second name stayed with Colby longer. A man named Cal Sturgis, who managed the stockroom at the hardware store and had been questioned after a separate incident involving a teenage girl in 1983 that had not resulted in charges. Sturgis had been at his sister's house in Corvallis on September 21st. His alibi checked out in a way that Colby could not find a seaman. Meanwhile, Gary and Elaine Harmon were doing what parents do when the investigation belongs to someone else. Gary drove the roads. Elaine made the calls. Tricia Oakes, Kendra's best friend, came to the Harmon house every day after school for the first 2 weeks and sat in the kitchen with Elaine and didn't say much. The town rallied the way small towns do. Meals on the porch. Search parties organized through the Ruritan Club, a collection taken up at the mill for a private investigator that Gary hired in November and had to let go by February when the money ran out. In the spring of 1986, partial remains were discovered in the wooded drainage area south of the mill, along the Tillamook River. A logging crew found them on a Tuesday morning in April. The case was reclassified as a homicide. The state medical examiner traveled up from Portland. Biological evidence was collected and submitted to the state crime lab. A DNA profile was attempted. The technology was new and the sample was degraded, and what emerged was partial, enough to confirm a male contributor, not enough to match against a database with any confidence. Hugh Colby drove to the Harmon house on Birchwood Road that Tuesday evening and sat with Gary and Elaine for an hour. He told them what had been found. He told them he was not going to stop. He meant it. He worked the case for 4 more years before his retirement. He never cleared it. What he handed to his successor was a file with 2 strong names and no evidence to move on either of them, and a biological profile that he believed, but could not prove, would eventually matter. By 1995, a decade gone, Hugh Colby had retired and moved to the coast. He had left the Harmon file with his successor and had spent the first year of retirement convinced he would stop thinking about it. He did not stop. Darren Pruitt was still teaching biology at Tillicum Falls High. He had been named Teacher of the Year by the district in 1992. His photograph had been in the weekly paper. He attended the 4th of July parade every year with his wife and 2 daughters, and stood at the same spot on Main Street near the Dairy Queen and waved a small flag the way everyone else did. He had coached junior varsity track for 3 years in the late 1980s. His students remembered him as exacting, but fair. Nobody connected his name to the Harmon case in any public way, because his name had never entered any public record in connection to it. He was simply a teacher who had been at a picnic on a Saturday in September 1985 and had gone home and continued teaching for the next 40 years. The Harmon family had not continued in the same way. Gary Harmon had developed a chronic illness in 1998 and had taken early disability retirement from the mill. Elaine still lived in the house on Birchwood Road. Danny Harmon, who had been 8 years old in the back seat of the station wagon when Kendra was reading her paperback, was 38 by 2015, living in Portland, and called his mother every Sunday. The Corolla had been returned to the family in 1986, and Gary had sold it within a month. On September 21st every year, Elaine drove to the community center parking lot on Mill Street and sat there for a while. She never stopped. By 2018, the Tillicum Falls PD Cold Case Unit held 41 unsolved files. The Harmon case was the oldest. Then, the Oregon State Police offered a forensic support initiative to departments with unresolved biological evidence, and the Harmon file landed on the desk of a cold case specialist named Detective Vera Kimball. Every case on this channel represents weeks of research, records, and piecing together lives that deserved far better. If this work matters to you, take a second to like and subscribe. Drop a comment telling us where in the world you're watching from. We read every one. Now let's get back to Kendra. Detective Vera Kimball was 41 years old, 8 years with the Oregon State Police Cold Case Unit, and had a practice of reading the entire original investigation file before she touched any evidence. Not for the evidence, she explained to colleagues, but for the investigator. She wanted to understand what the original detective had seen, what he had written in the margins, what he had circled and underlined and returned to, because that was where the case's real shape lived. She spent 2 days with Hugh Colby's stenographer pads, which had been scanned and archived in 2009. She found Darren Pruitt's name on page 6 of the first pad, flagged with a question mark, and the notation, picnic. Multiple W. Check again, spring. She found no spring follow-up in the subsequent pads. She noted it. The biological evidence from the 1986 discovery had been submitted to the State Crime Lab in 1992 and had yielded a partial DNA profile. Not enough for a direct match in CODIS's earlier iterations, but preserved in the system. In March 2019, Kimball submitted the profile for reanalysis using current sequencing technology. The updated profile was complete. She ran it against CODIS on a Wednesday afternoon. No match. She ran it against the genealogy database through the state's investigative genetic genealogy protocol, the same process that traces distant relatives through publicly submitted ancestry profiles and works backward to a single unknown contributor. The match came back in 6 days. The partial profiles of 2 individuals in the database, a man in Medford who had submitted his ancestry sample for family history research, and a woman in Eugene who had done the same. Each shared enough markers with the crime scene DNA to indicate a common close relative. Kimball built the family tree. It had one branch that led to a retired biology teacher in Tillicum Falls. She sat with that information for a long time. The man was retired. He had been honored at a ceremony 3 months before. He had a wife and daughters and grandchildren, and had spent 45 years teaching children in the same town where Kendra Harmon had grown up 2 streets from his house. She pulled the original suspect list. She found his name. She found the question mark. She found Colby's notation, check again, spring. She found no spring follow-up. She called Hugh Colby at his home on the coast. He was 80 years old. She told him she had a genealogy match. She told him the name. There was a silence on the line that lasted long enough that she checked to make sure the call hadn't dropped. Then, Colby said, "I had him circled." He said it quietly, the way you say something you have been holding for 34 years. She told him she knew. She told him she was going for a court order on the DNA sample. He asked if there was anything he could do. She told him to stay by his phone. Darren Pruitt had retired from Tillicum Falls High School in June 2019 after 45 years in the classroom, at a ceremony where the gymnasium was full and the superintendent cried. Former students came from Portland and Eugene and as far as Seattle. His wife, Joan, gave a speech. His 2 daughters were there with their own children. The community of Tillicum Falls had gathered to honor a man who had given them 45 years of biology lessons, track seasons, and the patient, steady presence of someone who had always been there. That ceremony was in June. Detective Vera Kimball received the genealogy match results in September 2019. She submitted a request for a court-ordered DNA sample from Darren Pruitt in October. The sample was collected through a standard compliance procedure, a swab administered without his knowledge of the case's direction, obtained legally through a health services encounter. The laboratory processed it over 3 weeks. On November 14, 2019, the results came back. Conclusive match. Darren Pruitt's DNA matched the biological evidence recovered from the drainage area along the Tillamook River in the spring of 1986. He was arrested at his home on Birchwood Road, 2 streets from the Harmon family's house. A proximity that had never been noted in any official document because nobody had thought to check what street Darren Pruitt had lived on in 1985. On December 3rd, 2019. He was 62 years old. He said nothing when Detective Kimball and 2 Tillicum Falls officers arrived at the door. He looked at the warrant with the careful, considering expression of a man reading a document he has been waiting to see for 34 years. He stepped back. He let them in. In Tillicum Falls, the news of the arrest arrived by the afternoon. The superintendent of schools issued a statement. Former students, some of whom had named children after him, read it on their phones and sat very still. The woman who had been Teacher of the Year 3 years after Darren Pruitt, who had attended his retirement party and hugged Joan at the door, called the police department to ask if it was real. It was real. Pruitt was charged with first-degree murder. He entered a guilty plea in March 2021, acknowledging what he had done on the morning of September 21, 1985, without elaborating on why. He was sentenced to life in prison. At sentencing, Gary Harmon read a statement from a piece of paper that he had written and rewritten 12 times, according to Elaine, and still had to stop twice to collect himself. He said he had driven the roads of Tillicum Falls for 34 years looking for answers, and had not known that for most of those 34 years, the answer had been standing in front of a classroom 2 streets from his house. He said he was not going to say what he thought about that, because there were no words in him for it. He said he wanted it on the record that his daughter had the temperament for nursing and would have been a remarkable one. In Tillicum Falls, the sentencing landed differently than the arrest had. The arrest had been a fact. The sentencing was a reckoning. The superintendent of schools commissioned an independent review of personnel records going back 40 years. Colby's successor in the PD issued a formal statement acknowledging the gaps in the original investigation. The Teacher of the Year plaque in the district office hallway was taken down. Nobody announced its removal. One morning it was there, the next morning it was not. Kendra Harmon was 17 years old in the fall of 1985. She had dark hair and her mother's way of really attending to people when they talked. She had a Corolla she had bought herself and a milk crate of paperback mysteries alphabetized by author, and a plan to study nursing because she thought she had the temperament for it. And she was right about that. She had a best friend who sat in the kitchen every day for 2 weeks after she disappeared. She had a father who drove the roads, and a mother who parked in that lot on Mill Street every September 21st for 34 years. Darren Pruitt taught those years. He taught children who became parents who brought their own children to his classroom. He was honored at a ceremony in June 2019 for the life he had built, while the Harmon family lived 2 streets away and marked the years. The investigation that should have found him in 1985 did not find him, because his alibi, confirmed by people who had been at a company picnic and had no reason to lie, held. What found him was the same evidence that had been waiting since 1986. A DINA profile in a state archive, reprocessed with technology that didn't exist when Hugh Colby wrote his notes, traced outward through a family tree to a retired biology teacher who had spent 34 years being exactly what he appeared to be. Hugh Colby is still alive. He was 81 when Vera Kimball called him with the name. He said, "I had him circled." She said she knew. What does it mean when a community honors a man for 45 years of teaching and then learns that the honor was also a shelter? What does the Harmon family's grief deserve? And does a guilty plea, without explanation, deliver any part of it? And what does it say about the limits of investigation in a small town, where everyone knows everyone, that a DINA database built from strangers' ancestry searches found what 34 years of local knowledge could not? There is something worth sitting with in the fact that the people who solved this case were a state police analyst who had never been to Tillicum Falls and 2 strangers who had submitted their DINA to a genealogy website for entirely different reasons. Sometimes the truth finds its way back from the most unexpected directions. Leave your thoughts in the comments. Justice found Kendra Harmon after 34 years. Stories like hers are why this channel exists. If you believe truth is always worth pursuing, subscribe. More cases are waiting below. Thank you for watching.